Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of AAC in the Cloud. This presentation is entitled Gestalt, Language Processing, and AAC. What do we know and where do we go? And this session, just so everyone is aware, will go for an hour and about 45 minutes. So just so you're aware, this is an extended session, and we will turn the time over to our presenters.
Hey everyone, my name is Laura Hayes, and I will let the other ladies introduce themselves in a second, but I just want to start us off with saying how excited we are that you are all here to join us. If you were present for Lauren and Emily's session a little bit earlier, you can tell that the majority of us could talk about this topic all day, and even in the hour and 45 minutes we have left, we probably won't get to everything and all of the information that we need to digest to learn and grow within the topic of GLP and AAC, but we'll do our best. So.
Hi, I'm Kate Flaxman. I am an employee of Advancing Opportunities. They pay my salary. I have about 14 years of experience working with individuals with complex communication needs across the lifespan. And I'm also a member of ASHA and the New Jersey Speech Hearing Association. I'm the co-vice chair at this point of the AAC committee for NJSHA, and I'm really happy to be here today.
And as I mentioned, I'm Laura Hayes. I am an employee of Special School District up here in St. Louis County, also member of ASHA, and I have over 13 years of AAC experience in both medical, pediatric, and educational settings. And I also like to just say I kind of grew up as an honorary SLP. I have a sister with a disability who has complex communication needs.
Right. And hi, everybody. My name is Kate McLaughlin. I am a speech language pathologist in private practice in Connecticut. I am in private practice through my private practice AAC Services of Connecticut. I also share information online and have a online course, Authentic AAC, through the AAC Coach. And I do some work with Learn, Play, Thrive. Like the other ladies, I'm a member of ASHA, and I have been working as an SLP primarily in AAC for over 16 years now.
So today we have three main objectives. We want to go beyond this, but these are the main three things that we want you to get out of this session. We want you to be able to define characteristics, at least three, of what could be a Gestalt language processor, list at least three features of an AAC system that would support someone who is a GLP, and describe at least two barriers that we currently see with our speech generating devices for someone who is a Gestalt language learner.
So today we're going to be talking about what do we know about Gestalt language processing in AAC? What are we doing currently with regards to Gestalt language processing in AAC? And then what are our next steps? Where do we go from here? So we'll cover those three very large topics. We also have a Padlet. There's a QR code on your screen at this point, and that will take you directly to our Padlet for additional resources.
And I'll just caveat that with the Padlet will be where you throw your questions. You can also throw them in the Slack, and we will come back to them after each of these sections, and then we will try to answer what we can then. I think that Josh is also putting the other links to resources in the Slack, so hopefully you guys see those as well.
Lots of resources today. So we're going to start with what do we know? So we're going to cover the background of Gestalt language processing, a little bit of AAC background, what it is, what it's not, and what do we know at this point? So background, what is Gestalt language processing? So Gestalt language processing is a style of language processing that is what we would also think about. We have analytic language processing, which is one form of language processing, and we have Gestalt language processing, which is the other style. Barry Prezant back in 1983, he contrasted both of these language processing styles and gave us a great breakdown. So in analytic language processing, the basic units are single words. It's what we typically think of as language learning. So how you take single words, and then as a young child, you learn to combine those to make longer and longer utterances, 1 word, 2 word, 3 word utterances. And the growth of language is through increased language complexity. With Gestalt language processing, the basic unit of language is no longer the single word unit. It can be very long utterances. It could be phrases, whole paragraphs of language. And they appear very grammatically sophisticated, so that these Gestalt language processors are able to provide very long utterances of speech, usually taken from other sources. This is typically echolalia. And the language growth requires breaking down these chunks to be able to generate their own novel utterances. So with analytic, can we go to the next slide? Oh, one more, one back. So with analytic language processing, they are able to produce generative language very early. So they start off by saying, for example, go, and then go car, and they're able to talk about things that they want to talk about very specifically and very quickly. And then that language use is generalized across situations. So they can then say go home and not just go car. While Gestalt language processors, their language is very inflexible at the early stages with limited generative use. So they're only able to say, it's time to get in the car. And that means that it can be used across situations, but it's very inflexible. They use the entire chunk to communicate that message. Therefore, it requires breaking down those chunks before moving on to generative language. So using that same example, they would need to break down, it's time to get in the car, before being able to use any of those words in flexible ways. It's also, with Gestalt language processing, very situational. So they are learned through social interactions and emotionally salient experiences, both positive and negative experiences. And the language learner will replicate a Gestalt to recreate that social connection or to reference the intent that they felt during the initial interaction. So for speaking individuals, they'll often use the intonation and pitch of the initial source, such as a family member or a TV show or other media. They may recreate gestures used by the source. And in the early stages of Gestalt language processing, it really is all about the experience, the whole experience to communicate a message, and should not be taken very literally. So it may take some guesswork on the part of the communication partner to understand the message. And for some, the source of the Gestalt may need to be determined. So young Gestalt language processors may not have the articulation to produce a clearly spoken Gestalt. It may just be the intonation. These are, some people have called them intonation babies. They're using Gestalts to communicate, or their articulation isn't clear, but it may be a longer utterance that needs to be discerned by the communication partners. So both analytic and Gestalt language processing are found in typical language development. Gestalt language processing is not inherently deviant. Males are more likely to use Gestalt language processing as per the research. And we notice Gestalt language processing when language learning is delayed. Toddlers babble in long, unintelligible strings all the time, and these may or may not be Gestalts. So Gestalt language processing is part of language development. And then language learning via Gestalts has 2 extra steps over analytic language processing, which makes it potentially a slower process to get to generative language. This is important to remember because sometimes we see as SLPs, we see language delays, and it may be because they're a Gestalt language processor who is just taking a little bit longer to get to the next steps of generative language. So we wanted to review some of the publication history of Gestalt language processing, which dates pretty far back. The Gestalt language processing is not a new concept. We've heard that this is new. It is not new. Barry Prezant, starting in 1981, had publications regarding Gestalt language processing and Echolalia. Ann Peters wrote a book, which was published in 1983 and again in 2021, called The Units of Language. Amy Weatherby in 1986 published an article, and there was an article in 1995 by Rydell and Prezant. And then Marge Blanc started in 2004 with articles. One of the big ones was When Speech Gets Stuck. The other one was Finding the Words to Tell the Whole Story. Those are both published on her website. And then she wrote a book titled Natural Language Acquisition on the Autism Spectrum, which was published in 2012, which details the process of natural language acquisition, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes. Lillian Stiegler then back in 2015 wrote an ASHA journal article about examining echolalia literature, and that brings us up to now, where more and more people since about 2020 have been talking about Gestalt language processing and reviewing the research and trying to figure out where to go from here. Early research demonstrated that delayed echolalia can be functional. Additional resources will also be listed later in this presentation. There is no research on Gestalt language processing that is specific to AAC. However, AAC is the tool as the means of expression and the language representation and language output. And it's how we process language is, whether we're a Gestalt language processor or an analytic language processor, is independent of our modality of communication. So that makes it very relevant. How we process language is relevant, but the output are, whether we're an AAC user or we're using speech, is the research still matters. So we're going to go through the stages of natural language acquisition as defined by Marge Blanc back in 2012. Her book really defines the stages that individuals go through, from starting with stage 1 echolalia to being able to generate novel utterances themselves in later stages. Once someone goes through all the stages of natural language acquisition, it's said that their language would be indiscernible from an analytic language processor's but they need to go through all of the steps in order to achieve that ability. So with that being said, I'm going to start with stage 1. Stage 1 is Echolalia, and Gestalts. Gestalts are whole chunks of language. Language is verbatim from other sources. These sources may include songs, sentences, scripts, parts of media. The intonation of the original source is essential. Frequently, these are individuals who sound like the source. They speak in character voices, or they sometimes sound like their parents yelling at them. They use that same intonation. The Gestalts should not be taken literally. They are situationally based. And a unit can be one word or a very long paragraph. In some cases, entire scenes from favorite TV shows and movies. And if an individual is able to use single words in specific contexts, but not for generative language, these may be single word gestalts that have been learned as part of social routines or expected behavior for a given routine. And then in some cases, if you don't know, if you are wondering if somebody is a Gestalt language processor, in stage 1, they may be looking at media over and over again, or replicating social routines with specific communication partners. So, for example, I have a student who always engages in the same gestures with specific communication partners, because she understands that the communication partner understands and they can participate in a social routine using those gestures. It may take detective work to determine source or meaning of the message. Marge Blanc would definitely argue that it's important to step back and listen at this point. You have to be able to figure out what the source, in some cases, you have to figure out what the source of the Gestalt is and what the meaning to the child is, what message they're trying to convey. And something important to keep in mind is that echolalia is not disordered analytic language development. Okay, so in stage 1, individuals are going to need lots of examples of gestalts that are easy to break down into parts. Sometimes someone will need to have lots of gestalts in their repertoire before they can move on to subsequent stages of natural language acquisition. So it would be beneficial to provide language models that can be easily broken down, because there's definitely going to be gestalts that people use that are going to be very difficult to break down. Some longer utterances, things that are, whole paragraphs of TV shows and things like that are going to be much more challenging to break down versus some of these examples. So some of the things like let's go, let's look at, don't, or like. There's a QR code which links to a PDF handout that Marge Blanc created with some Gestalt examples for aided AAC for a presentation that she did. That's also posted on YouTube through the New Jersey Autism Center of Excellence. So these language models should not be primarily requests. Arguably, requests do not provide connection, and Gestalt language processors learn based on those social connections and routines. And these early gestalts should be able to be used flexibly across situations and communicative purposes. So please remember that for Gestalt language processors in stage 1, it's about the experience, not the literal message. You may find that media references are used significantly more by individuals in stage 1. However, these phrases may be very long and difficult to break down in future steps. So here are some suggestions that are posted on that handout. So things like, let's get that snack, or let's get that out, or let's go home. Things like commenting, it's a blue ball, directing attention to others, look at that, look at puppy, look at the book. Commenting on one's actions or intentions, I'm happy or I'm sad. Asking questions such as what's that or what's next. Protesting with the word don't, so don't like it, don't want it, don't help, don't do that. Confirming with like, so I like that book, I like them. Those are examples that she gave. It's best to begin introducing language models that fit the needs of Gestalt language processors at stage 1 in preparation for stage 2 of natural language acquisition. So some of these will definitely be great examples. Okay, so stage 2 is where stage 1 chunks are going to start to be broken down into parts. So typically they're combined with other parts of other wholes to mix and match. This is going to be the most challenging aspect with regard to aided AAC because of inherent programming challenges in systems. They start at this point, Gestalt language processors will start to realize that they can change the message meaning based on what is added or subtracted to the learned phrase. This is also why having phrases that can be broken down is important. Breaking apart the happy birthday song is going to be a lot more difficult with fewer opportunities than I like that. So adding mitigations, which is the actual broken down parts, and opportunities for playing with parts of Gestalts need to be specific to the AAC system and the user. And then here's some examples of stage 2 Gestalts. So somebody might have let's get out of here and want some more, and they are going to start to break it down into let's get some more or want out of here. And within mitigations in stage 2 to be able to provide opportunities for this mixing and matching are going to be system dependent. This may happen via pop-ups, modified visual scene displays, different folders and things like that. I will say that I always recommend limiting folders or navigational demands, what I call rabbit holes, but that will depend on the number of messages available on a page. At this point, if you're talking about AAC, aided language input is going to be incredibly important because this is the start to demonstrating that language can be modified and mixed and matched and things like that. Okay, so at stage 3, this is where individuals will begin isolating single words, mitigations, those gestalts will be broken down further and further into either single words or 2-word combinations without grammar. This is the first time that a Gestalt language processor will have understanding at the word level and be able to isolate those single words within language. So this would be considered the first step of self-generated language. And also they will need access to a robust single word message system at this point in time to be able to learn all those words and how to make new combinations with them. This is when single words take on distinct meaning and can start to be used more flexibly. Typically, single words will be taken from those mitigated gestalts first. Stages 4, 5, and 6 are all when original sentences start to incur grammar increases in complexity. They require a wide variety of grammar models at this stage with high quality aided language input. And stages 5 and 6 expand on grammar, similar to what we understand in analytic language processing. I will say that more research is needed into later stages of Gestalt language processing, and how Gestalt language processors use grammatical morphemes and sentence structure. That is an area of need at this point. We're going to talk about some misconceptions and myths that we've heard about Gestalt language processing and AAC. One of the things that we've heard is that it's not evidence-based. We have at this point decades of research on Gestalt language processing, and we are not throwing away decades of AAC research. My quote right now is good AAC is still good AAC. We're not changing the way we provide language modeling. We're just making accommodations so Gestalt language processors have the opportunity to learn generative language through their style of language learning. We've also heard we're using a form of facilitated communication, and we're not advocating for facilitated communication. We're advocating for providing access to messages that are accessible to the language learner through their language processing style. This is not to tell them what to say, when to say it, or even how to say their message. It just provides opportunities for connection via aided AAC. We've heard that we're trying to find completely new tools, or we need completely new tools. And again, I'm going back to what I keep saying, good AAC is still good AAC. We don't need new tools. However, if what we're doing does not match up with someone's language processing style, it may not lead to language learning due to the disconnect. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. If a learner is generating language with single word units, they are an analytic language processor. And what I would say to that is that just because somebody has single word units or is using AAC with single word units, they may have those as single word gestalts or be using them at stage 3 of natural language acquisition. Just because someone uses single word units, so they may still very much be a Gestalt language processor. Typically, what you would see if they're using them as single word gestalts, they would not be using those messages flexibly, or they would not be able to combine them into 2-word combinations to be able to increase their length of utterance. So a few more misconceptions. It's the same as a phrase-based system, and we would argue that Gestalt language processors do not necessarily require phrase-based systems in the sense that we've been using them as phrase-based systems, because not all phrases are easily broken down. Phrase-based systems don't always include single words. Phrase-based systems that may not mean anything to a child, because they may not include phrases that are meaningful. And if something is not meaningful to a Gestalt language processor, they're not going to form those social connections, which lead to language meaning. And Gestalts need to be meaningful to the individuals. Systems made of all phrase-based messages is appropriate or a recommended starting point. We are not advocating for that as a starting point or appropriate, because it would not allow for aided language input or future language growth. No matter how you process language, single words are going to be needed, as they're the building blocks of language, and phrase-based systems may not meet a Gestalt language processor's language needs, even at stage 1, because as I said, they may not be meaningful to the individual. So we're not advocating for that. And then the last misconception regarding Gestalt language processing and AAC is that it is not necessary to shift our practice. We would argue that if we're doing what we are doing currently with regard to language processing and AAC does not match up with an individual's language processing style, it may not lead to language learning due to the disconnect. We have seen students who have had or individuals who have had access to single word AAC systems for significantly long periods of time and have not made anticipated progress. Once we shift our practice, we have seen incredible language growth. And this shift is based on the connections that we're seeing. You have to remember that there's 2 extra steps to Gestalt language processing to be able to learn language, and we have to provide those supports for Gestalt language processors to be able to learn language. So with all that being said, with shifting our practice, there are a few difficulties with current AAC system layouts, including current organizations assume analytic language processing or natural language acquisition at stages 3 or greater. They're single word systems. And we are modeling single word units and teaching language via analytical language processing style. Early implementation of AAC often focuses on core vocabulary at single word units, modeling 1 to 2 words above learner generative level, increasing MLU and syntactic complexity. We're teaching to analytic language processors, which may not be helpful for Gestalt language processors. And then if we assume that all AAC users are analytic language processors, it requires a Gestalt language processor who is an AAC user to master stages 1 and 2 of natural language acquisition without the support of their communication modality, which is really unfair to the AAC user. And then current high-tech aided AAC software may lack features, including recorded audio and embedding video capabilities, along with limitations of intonation and inflection of synthesized speech. For individuals in stage 1 and 2 of natural language acquisition, intonation and inflection are paramount to the Gestalt language processor. Remember, the entire episode matters for language learning. So being able to have some of those features are going to be beneficial to Gestalt language learners who use high-tech aided AAC. However, I will also say that creating language organizations specifically designed for Gestalt language processors is also not appropriate. So a one-size-fits-all approach will not necessarily produce the same results for all Gestalt language processors.
All right. Thanks, Kate. So one of the questions we've heard from a lot of different folks talking about Gestalt language processing in AAC is, what about core vocabulary and what about motor plans? And I think we can say we know that there is a significant amount of literature on core vocabulary and motor planning, and we understand that both are critical components to competence in the AAC in the long term. But for communicators who are Gestalt language processors, these areas may not be our primary focus or area of need, at least initially, especially in the early stages of NLA. So how should we consider motor planning and core when we think about AAC for Gestalt language processors? And I think we can say that there are some essential considerations for all AAC learners. And as we move through these next several slides, I'd just like to credit and thank Rachel Dorsey for her contributions on these slides and helping me frame this discussion. The first essential consideration for all AAC learners is self-determination. We want to be thinking about their self-image, their understanding of themselves and their relationships with other people, understanding why they're doing any particular task and why that task is important to them as an individual. They need to understand how it connects to their life. They need to be actively participating in learning on their own volition, and be engaging actively in problem solving within this context of I understand why I'm doing it and why it matters to me. And they also need to view themselves as somebody with an important role in the context and somebody with important ideas and thoughts to share. So this idea of self-determination and everything that comes under that, and you'll see on the slide, self-awareness, regulation, autonomy, cognitive clarity and problem solving and self-advocacy, all of those things are essential considerations for all of our AAC learners. The next essential consideration that we're suggesting is their language processing style. So are they an analytic language processor, or are they a Gestalt language processor? Next, we want to be thinking about core vocabulary, right? Core vocabulary are the words that everybody needs, the individual components of a message, the words that that learners need to generate messages, and they are the words that make up many Gestalts. So that we're suggesting here that core vocabulary is an essential part of everyone's expression through AAC. And then finally, motor plan. Motor plan being the access to language in as efficient a way as possible. So what physical movements are needed to access the language on the AAC system? How can that be achieved as efficiently as possible? And as Kate said here and before, good AAC is still good AAC. But we need to think about how do we take what we know about core vocabulary and motor planning and apply it when we're working with a learner with a different processing style. So for analytic language processors, the learners acquire individual units and the motor plan to access those individual units, and they build their messages from there. For our Gestalt language processors, their Gestalts are often made up of many core words, but they don't necessarily process those individual units until they have moved through at least stage 3. If we prioritize individual core and motor plans out of context from the Gestalt, we're really teaching single words in a way that they are not going to be able to use flexibly. And we're using a lot of our time and our learners' time and resources for very little communicative growth and a very limited impact on the quality of life for our learners. So what we're suggesting here is that we need to shift towards understanding Gestalt language processing in order to have a big impact on their language development. And so if you look here on this slide, we're really saying that self-determination and language processing, everything has to be done and understood through the lens of self-determination. It encompasses everything that our learners are doing. And so we need them to be acting on their own volition. We need them to be expressing what matters to them and connecting with others in a way that works for them. And how we apply our understanding of core vocabulary and motor planning, we need to do that within the context of understanding our learners' language processing style. And so I'd like to provide an analogy here for us to think about an AAC journey so that we can consider core vocabulary and motor planning. So I'd like for us to think about the AAC journey that our learners are on as a car. And and it's really the parent or the professional that's helping to drive this AAC journey. Right. When we think about core vocabulary, these are those individual components that need to happen. In this analogy of the car, it's the going and the stopping and the turning, right? And the motor planning are the actual things that have to happen, or the execution of those things, like steering the car, using the pedals to brake or hit the gas. And both of these are really, really important to know how to support. All right. But if you don't know what kind of car you're driving or how to drive it, you're in trouble, right? If you assume that your learner is an analytic language processor, for this example, if you assume you have an automatic car, and you don't know how to support or a Gestalt language processor, or this analogy, a stick, you're going to run into trouble along that AAC journey. So if you stall that vehicle, it's not the learner's fault, right? It's the fault of the driver not knowing how to help support that car, or that AAC journey along the way. So we need to make this journey work well for our Gestalt language processors. We need to prioritize our understanding of self-determination and understanding of Gestalt language processing, so that we're providing the support that the learners need to do well and to proceed on their AAC journey in a way that will give them the greatest language outcomes and the most ability to communicate meaningfully in their life.
Okay, so we're going to stop for a second, and we do have some questions. It looked like some individuals that are watching are having difficulty getting into the Slack track 1. So I'm going to try to, for those of you that are in that chat, I will carry some questions over, but I do see some in our Padlet. And so the first one is, would you classify the topic pages and quickfires on TD Snap as Gestalt language use? I think that I'll answer that one. So it kind of goes back to what Kate was saying about our Gestalts simply programmed phrases or phrase-based systems. And the topics page and the quickfire pages do have phrase-based language within them, but they're not necessarily Gestalts. Gestalts are a thing, especially early on in those early stages, we want to be thinking about Gestalts that are meaningful to the experience. And so if we have a phrase like, I'm hungry, and that means nothing to our Gestalt language learner, that would not be a Gestalt that we would necessarily utilize from the get-go, because it has no meaning to an experience or an episode for that individual. So even though they are topic pages and they are phrase-based in nature, they're not necessarily all Gestalts or Gestalts that we would jump to as a starter. You guys have anything to add on that one?
No, I think that's great.
And then another question was, would you put in the full phrase such as let's get that, or would you just have let's or let's get and then find the other words you were looking for? And this, I think, goes back to a question that was posed in the Slack channel as far as, for programming purposes, would you have a phrase starter or the whole phrase?
I can answer that, Laura. So at stage 1 of natural language acquisition, I would personally program in the entire phrase because the entire phrase is the Gestalt and then I would also provide access to the sentence starters so that the person can learn at later stages of NLA how to break those Gestalts down. So that would be, and how to do that would be system dependent. What would you do, Laura, Kate?
Yeah, I think, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as we move forward. I think it is highly system dependent, depending on what system, what language organization you're using, and how it affects that system and where it makes the most sense. But we will talk a little bit more about what we see working a little bit later.
And we have a few case study examples that we'll have time for. Here's another one. If a child is mainly non-speaking, how can you tell if they're an analytic or Gestalt language processor?
I think that's a great question. And one of the things that I think about is their use of media. So how are they using, and you'll get a chance to see some of that in some of the case studies, but how are they using media, and are they using it communicatively? So if we see learners going back to certain chunks of media over and over and over again, that is an indication that they very well may be a Gestalt language processor. I think also, even if they don't have, if they have some vocalizations, whether or not they're intelligible, if they have a strong intonation to them and you hear that frequently, that's probably also an indication that they may be a Gestalt language processor. Kate, do you have anything to add?
No, I think other things that I've seen that aren't media based are based on like social routine, like development of social routines, like gestures and things like that. Like a student who has the same repetitive interactions with specific communication partners on a regular basis because they are able to replicate those successful social interactions, even though they're not media based, I would consider them for high potential to be a Gestalt language processor.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, individuals who are Gestalt language processors are Gestalt processors likely more broadly. And so understanding that language is one way in which you're seeing their Gestalt processing. But as Kate's saying, you may see their Gestalt processing play out in other aspects of their play, their interactions, that sort of thing.
And last question right now is just, I think I understand from Susan, I think I understand how to identify a person who is at GLP stage 1, but do you have suggestions for differentially determining GLP from ALP in later stages? I think that's a great question. And I think that Alex and Marge, Alex Sackos from Meaningful Speech, she has a wonderful course diving into this further, but I think they would tell you that the best observational data that you can take is from language samples. And so taking those language samples over time and diving into those will help you really determine, for example, if they're using a lot of single words, whether those words are flexible and generative language, and they might be ALP and analytic in nature, or if they are using other stages and some of these other characteristics we've talked about, and they might just be a Gestalt language processor who are using stage 1 and stage 3 single word.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I think this is also part of the reason that this understanding that our assessment is going to happen over time, and it really requires partnering with really close partners to the learner who have a lot of data over time, what they say and what it might mean, and doing that, as Alex calls it, their March detective work. I think it also is why it's really important to get really connected with your learners and get to know them really well, because that's how you're going to be able to make get enough of information to do that determination.
And I just wanted to say that we'll come back to more questions in a little bit at the end of each section. If you're watching this recorded, I know we've added links under both the Padlet and the Slack, but if you need resources to our slides and you don't see them on the conference page, the hyperlink is tinyurl.com/GLP and AAC Cloud 2022. So hopefully that will give you the handouts for this presentation. Okay, so we talked about what it is and kind of the background. Where are we going, or what are we doing right now? This is an area of high interest for a lot of people. As Kate mentioned earlier, it is something that, even though it's been around a long time, it's become a prominent topic in the last couple of years. So we did, knowing that, we did a survey, a microcosm of SLPs for a large metropolitan school district that supports over 23,000 students with an IEP from pre-K until graduation. This is St. Louis County Special School District. And so we surveyed approximately 400 SLPs. We got 282 responses. Of those SLPs, we had almost 98% say that they support a student with an AU diagnosis. There were a few diagnostic SLPs as well as a few SLPs that we knew supported a classroom that the diagnosis was specific to speech articulation and apraxia of speech. So that's a pretty big number though. So we feel like we got a good representation. We had over 60% respondents. So we felt like that was a good amount of information that we wanted to share with you guys. When we looked at the results, within the survey itself, we asked them if they thought that they supported one of these students that might be a Gestalt language processor based off the characteristics you see in the image. Are they using rich intonation? Do they speak in long scripts? Are they stuck at a single word level? Do they produce unintelligible long strings of language, often labeled as jargon? You can see from the results that 56% said yes, 11% said unsure, and 33% said no. If we look at the research, Barry Prezant had about 75% as an estimation in 1983. And if you look at the unsure and the yes, that estimation is about 67%. I want to note that this baseline survey is with mostly untrained SLPs. So I would be intrigued to kind of give this survey down the road and see once they're more established and trained in the area of Gestalt language processing, if that number would change. So just as a preface, this is to mostly SLPs who have not been trained formally through our district. We also asked them for the students that they support who they would classify as a Gestalt language processor and who also use AAC, if their current system was meeting their communication needs. And you can see that there is a huge number of individuals who gave a response of 3, saying that it neither was super supportive or non-supportive. And perhaps that means that they don't know, but they aren't really sure. But if you look at the 1s and 2s that felt like they were non-supportive, that's about 23%, and supportive would be about 26%. And then we asked them, because really what we want to know, if we're thinking about the car and the analogy of supporting someone who is GLP, we want to be making sure that they have the right tools. They know, are they driving a stick or an automatic? We want to make sure they have these resources. So we asked, you feel that you have adequate knowledge to support a student who is on your caseload, who might be a GLP, who uses AAC? And you can see that the majority felt like they did not. Hopefully you may feel similarly if you're in our audience today or watching this as a recorded webinar, but 60% said no. 25% said they didn't support this population. And again, I want to clarify that this is GLP and AAC use. So they could still be supporting someone who does not have an AAC system that would be classified as a Gestalt language processor. But then if you dive further into that number of that 60%, so that would be about 214 individuals that said they support someone who is GLP, who is using AAC. 80% of that number felt like they did not have enough knowledge and resources to support Gestalt language processing. So it tells us that we need to do better and we need to offer additional resources. So then we asked, what resources would be helpful for you to support these individuals? Oops. And they said that there were multiple responses allowed. So the one that was the highest, the font is a little small, I apologize, but the one that is the highest response is just that overall GLP intervention and implementation. People are craving that. People want to know how to support someone who processes language differently or just in a different way than what we've been doing. The other one, so that was about 83% of respondents. The other one that was pretty high, as you can see, just overall background on GLP. Modifying systems was a little over 50%, 57%. Again, as we mentioned earlier, we aren't sure exactly what that should look like yet. And we're still in the area of diving into what modifications need to be made. And then just overall intervention specifically to GLP and AAC, also very high, over 70%. The other thing I think is noteworthy about this survey is just the fact that when you do a survey, oftentimes you have anything else you would like to share with us. And most of the time people kind of submit and move on. With this survey, again, we had 282 responses. We had 209 responses to this question of any other thoughts or questions you would like to share with us about GLP and AAC. The ones that were recurrent that I think are noteworthy are just, can we get a workshop or training to help understand moving through GLP stages? I'm so glad we're looking into this. I'm super interested on this topic. And I feel like there needs to be more information for both AAC and GLP to everyone. When we're looking at a collaborative approach and knowing how we support as a team, it's super important to know that everyone needs to be on board, not just with GLP, but neuroaffirming practices. So that needs to be not just SLPs, right? It needs to be teachers, OTs, parents, anybody who is supporting that as a communication partner to the learner. So sorry, you guys missed those quotes, but those were kind of the recurring themes that we saw with those responses. Okay, so we also kind of some baseline information. So that was a microcosm of where my school district is. We would like to know where you guys are at on your AAC journey. So when we think about where you're at on your AAC journey right now, if you guys could go to wholeev.com/Laura Hayes 981. And just answer this question for us. Or you can also, if you have your phone available, you could text Laura Hayes 981 to 22333. And then you would just answer based off of where you feel like you're at on your journey, A, B, C, or D. If you're watching this recorded, we are actually going to leave this question. We would like to kind of come back to this question down the road and see if this changes for individuals. And I will restate how to get to the poll. But we will have this question open. So please fill it out, even if you're watching this recorded, because we want to know kind of where you're at now and see if this changes as we dive further into the topic. So if you haven't already responded, it is at the top of this slide, but it's wholeev.com/Laura Hayes, LauraHayes. Oh, it's full. Okay, well, you guys are amazing. We will find another way to share that if you're watching and recorded, or we will come back to it. But it looks like most of you guys feel like you're getting started. You know what it is, but you want more info, which is probably why you're here today. So that's fantastic. I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you're already having some takeaways. Okay. And then the other thing we wanted to ask you today, my slides are being cranky, is have you incorporated understanding of natural language acquisition and Gestalt language processing into your AAC therapy approach? 1 second. Okay, it should be live. Oh, you guys are so fast. Okay, if you haven't responded yet, you can still respond. Again, it's pollev.com/LauraHayes981, or you can text Laura Hayes 981 to 22333. It looks like the majority of us are saying no, not yet. And again, hopefully once you have a better understanding of the information in the background and kind of some shifts in thinking, that you'll start to use some of that information in your practicum. Okay, diving into case studies. We have 3 case studies to share with you. I know we're just really excited to kind of share how far we've come already in a short amount of time. A little bit of a preface on these first 2 case studies. These are students that I support indirectly. So I'm a facilitator for the school district of St. Louis County. And so I don't have direct minutes with these individuals. You will see their SLPs, that are their direct service providers, in the room. But based off of the information that we have learned together, you'll hear about kind of the baseline and where we were and kind of where we're at now. So these are changes in videos from this calendar school year. The first one we're going to talk about is a 9-year-old autistic girl. She is incredibly bright. She can match letters, colors, shapes, and numbers. She is highly echoic with both spoken auditory models using oral speech with an AAC system. And she can actually imitate up to an 8 to 12 activation on her device, formulating 3 to 4 word sentences. The biggest caveat with that is that it's still highly prompt dependent and based off of those models from a communication partner. She has relatively good receptive vocabulary, but anything that is generative from auditory and verbal prompts and models. So meaning that she does not have great generative flexible language at this point, because she is struggling to carry over things that have been taught to her in individual contexts. I'm just going to ask, does anybody have someone that they might be able to relate to as far as the student goes? She also has spontaneous spoken language that we would classify as scripts or gestalts, and she has a lot of unintelligible jargon, one of which you'll see an example of in the video that we share. She has dysregulation, and that increases when provided with what we would call structured lesson planning or kind of your classic academic style work. Her system layout is Lamports for Life on an iPad. It is completely open. She is on the full user, and I'll show you an example of a page that we customized for her, but we had done some recent customization, noting that she had some scripts from preferred media that she went to. Her favorite is Sophia the First. So while you guys watch these videos, just some questions to kind of ask, and you can throw them in the chat. We would love for you guys to kind of synthesize this together. But what do you notice when you watch the video? Don't come for me, because I am there's something that I do in the video where we're working on kind of just some exchanges, and you learn so much from watching yourself. And so there's a few things I would do differently. So don't come for me, but what strategies do you see that we're using, and what questions or wonderings do you have? Anything too that you might want to change or explore as a therapist or just as a team following this video. We'll show 2 videos. This one, again, this is a preferred script, a preferred activity. The part that I want to highlight here is the fact that we are looking at her as using a script that is highly unintelligible. You will notice that neither the SLP nor I in this session can determine what this script is. So if you have an idea or you recognize this from media, please put it in the Slack channel, because I'm still struggling.
It's mine, okay. Let's go. Want to get across the kickball?
Okay, so like I said, if you recognize that Gestalt that she is using, we believe it's from media, but we are not sure. So please put that in the Slack channel because we're always constantly trying to do that detective work. The second one I wanted to highlight is the same activity. And just kind of specifically take note here of what the communication partners are modeling. So we're trying to model it's fine, got to get more. And I just wanted to preface it with when she does activate the device, she has not yet learned to clear her message window. So you will hear previous activations when she communicates the messages.
It's mine, okay.
Let's go. Want to get across the kickball?
Okay. So again, she utilized that script throughout. We tried to affirm and acknowledge that script, which is a strategy of NLA. Oh, and I think it just played the same video, so sorry. Let's okay, sorry, here's the second video, guys. Is it playing the same one, you guys? Yeah. Okay. Sorry for the tech issues. We're going to jump to the next slide because I do want you guys to see the page that we created. This is under the Mind page under Lamports for Life. You can see we added specific Sophia, the first scripts there. So I'm so excited. One of the things you'll notice is that the real estate isn't great on these icons. So the scripts are longer than what the text shows on the icons. And then we just added some general play scripts. So let's play, it's mine, I'll help, that we noticed she was either using or that we thought that she was implying with some of her Gestalt she was utilizing across activities. What we noticed is that once we started to utilize these in practice, she had increased attention, increased scripts, increased eye contact and shared enjoyment, that connection piece, spontaneous return to the device, and increased spoken imitation as well as delayed imitation. So her generative language and her spontaneous use of language within activities, as well as her overall social connection to communication partners, greatly increased. And I will say that this was over the course of about 8 weeks once we started initiating this practice. So this was not across years. And she was someone who had been utilizing an AAC system for over 4 years, utilizing analytic language approaches, core word of the week, working on working on language strategies within her ABA. It wasn't carrying over. She wasn't making progress. And so within the course of 8 weeks, these were the things that we got to see, and just really exciting, because when you think about it, if you are not speaking the same language as someone, of course, you're going to have communication breakdowns. You may see increased regulation. So the fact that she felt acknowledged and heard, and we were talking the same language, these were the things that we saw. Case study number 2 is a 9-year-old autistic boy. He is an individual who I just got called into for his team this year. So he is new to AAC. He has great memory, wants to do well. needing prompts and supports for joint attention, routines, instruction, transition, and sensory processing. That was pulled directly from the IEP. He does have spoken spontaneous language that still consists primarily of scripts. He is beginning to greet others spontaneously, but at times still needs prompts. And again, work is hard, he gets frustrated, and he will misbehave, especially with academic content that is presented to him. He is a good example of how we don't have to start with requests and demands when we're looking at supporting someone with an AAC system who is GLP. He is great at commenting about his environment. We just have to kind of understand that these gestalts might be something that we do detective work, because he was utilizing anywhere from stage 1 to stage 3. He is utilizing and trialing touch chat with word power 60 basic. He has scripts that were added to a custom topic page, and again, all icons were visible. So think about, do some questions to think about. Again, throw them in the Slack if you would like. But what do you notice about the video? What strategies are you seeing? What questions or wonderings might you have? And what would you want to explore or change?
Play-Dohs? Groups. My phrases. Clear? You want to pick one? You want to play? Let's play Play-Doh.
There!
There it is.
The orange? Can I have Play-Doh?
Absolutely. Let's play Play-Doh. Groups. My phrases. There it is. Orange. Art. Play-Doh. It's colors. Orange. It is orange Play-Doh. I like it. I see it. Where's my Play-Doh?
There.
There. Let's get more.
Green!
It's a green one.
Good job.
Good job. Clear. Let's play. Let's open it.
The doors. Not a door.
Not a doors. Oh, it's tough. It's
Okay, so as far as Nla strategies, again, as Kate mentioned, we want to be modeling gestalts that are mitigable. So you hear me modeling, you want to pick one, there it is, I like it, I see it. I'm doing a combination of verbal models as well as ones that I'm using the device for. With this individual, I was using a combination of combining words on the core and fringe pages, as well as using a pre-programmed gestalts under my phrases under the category page. So as Kate mentioned earlier, everything is highly customized to whatever the AAC system is that your individual is utilizing, and it should be feature matched to the system that they need. There isn't one system that we would recommend. One thing that is important for this video and for him was acknowledging the gestalt or the response or the comment, whatever I was hearing from him, even if it felt off topic or didn't make sense, because again, that's the piece of detective work that we're using to try to figure out what that language means to that learner. It's also a really great example of mitigation following a model. He is so bright that within days, his SLP emailed me back and said within days, he was already starting to move into stage 3 and stage 2 and stage 3 of breaking down gestalts that were modeled to him and utilizing them more flexibly. So it's a good point to mention that every learner is different and that we we might be moving through stages differently. The other thing Marge talks about is not necessarily if they're mostly utilizing stage 2 mitigations, we don't necessarily, if we were working with an analytic language processor, we would call it like a step ladder, right? If they use one word, then we use 2 words to kind of build them up. When we're working with Gestalt language processors, we really want to stay within the stage that they're showing us to be able to support their understanding and their processing. Anything else you guys would add to that?
Play-Doh?
Kate, I saw you on mute.
Yeah, people are saying that the audio is low and that it's jumpy. I'm not hearing low audio on my end, but I'm definitely seeing jumpy audio, jumpy video.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything you can do on your end.
I don't know if there is. I was just trying to problem solve that. I apologize for that. Videos enable jumpy playback quality and turn the volume up. Okay. Were you guys able in the Slack, were you guys able to hear the audio on the first case study? Or was that jumpy and difficult too? It was jumpy. Okay. The audio is fine on that one. Okay. Well, if Josh or anyone on the other end has any ideas, I don't off the top of my head, but let me talk to you guys about kind of what we saw as far as kind of like a PDSA of like what we learned from just a short amount of time using AAC with this individual to augment his spoken speech. We saw almost immediate increased attention, increased scripts from stages 1 to 3, increased eye contact, increased shared enjoyment and initiation of preferred topics, which was huge because, again, when we're thinking about language that's generative, we want it to be something that is based off of the individual's interests and supportive of what they're cognitively generating in their minds. Okay. Guys, sorry about the low quality on the videos. Hopefully the third one is better. He also had spontaneous return to the device. He was utilizing a combination of core and fringe and those gestalts that were under the My Phrases page from this group's page that you might branch off to. He was also kind of using it as a self tool to imitate and produce phrases on his own as well. And he had increased commenting.
Okay, so the third case study is somebody that I have consulted with for a long time. I am not their SLP, and it's she's an autistic 8-year-old. She has significant apraxia, which impacts all skills. She needs a lot of processing time to be able to get her body to cooperate. She has very strong connections with familiar communication partners, such as family and friends. She is non-speaking. I don't think she has any mouth words that are used consistently. She's used high-tech AAC since age 2. At age 2, her family started with Proloquo Go. And she's always been drawn to technology. She uses YouTube for sensory regulation. After a few years of Proloquo Go and a lack of progress, her team added in Speak for Yourself due to the motor planning component, thinking that that was going to increase her AAC use and length of utterance. At this point in time, she is using a fantastic combination of YouTube, Proloquo Go, and Speak for Yourself. She goes in and out of all 3 modalities. She almost always has access to YouTube for sensory regulation and leisure on a separate iPad when she was attending school. At this point, she is homeschooled. And I will say that Gestalts for her system were added within ProLoquated Go, not Speak for Yourself, because Speak for Yourself does not allow for recorded audio. So we'll see a few short clips of her at home with her family. Same questions?
Eight, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16,
we forgot 14.
17,
That's okay.
18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25.
Woo, baby, good job. 25! Oh, the counting comment.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Hooray! High five.
M-O-M. Mom! I just love my mom. And the word mom.
I love you, baby. You're a rock star.
Oh? Huh. What's the...
Mom, I love you. You did great, baby. I'm really proud.
What's this? Mom.
Mom.
Mom, we love you. So we got you this. Happy Mother's Day!
I love you, baby.
Well, Mom.
So the earlier interactions with her counting were before we had modified her AAC system, and she had been doing that for a while, talking about trying to interact in various ways with media. But now that we know that she's a Gestalt language processor and her family recognizes all of these Gestalts that she uses, she really has an increased connection with her family on a daily basis. So this was a text that I got the other day from her mom, that the sibling and the mom went away for 2 days while dad and the AAC user stayed home with the dogs. And she wrote, when we first got back, I greeted her and told her how much I missed her, and sibling did too. She didn't appear to have any major reaction at first, but after a few minutes, she started playing the song, welcome home, when your house is filled with family, this is home. She's played it a few times now with lots of snuggles mixed in, and just played it again as she pulled me in for a snuggle. So these communication interactions are no longer rare for this family. They're a daily occurrence. However, they're really challenging to record in real time. So we've been trying to get more clips. We introduced Gestalts to her AAC system in the height of the COVID lockdown when she was home full time. We don't have any data, but I suggested to the family that they insert audio clips of favorite Gestalts, and they reported quickly back that she was thrilled. And then they quickly began to initiate the addition of Gestalts to ProLoquated Go. So she plays a Gestalt a few times, indicates to a parent where to program her Gestalt within ProLoquated Go, and then together they add the Gestalt. I'll show you what one of her pages looks like in a minute. There's been a huge increase in the past 2 years of communication functions, and communication has definitely increased overall. So if we were to have data, it would definitely show increases in communicative purposes and functions, such as providing information, asking and answering questions, and social closeness. Initiation of interactions has increased over the past 2 years significantly, and participation in conversations has also increased dramatically. She independently inserts gestalts into conversations to provide information, clarify others' messages, and demonstrates understanding. She also has increased conversational turn taking. She will insert different gestalts into conversations, and she finds different gestalts using either YouTube or pre-programmed gestalts to communicate within different topics. And so you can see on the next slide what one of her Gestalt pages looks like. This is a screenshot of it. So they've taken like little screenshots of the video clip, and then there's audio clips under each one of these. Okay. I know that there's a bunch of questions that have been posted in the Slack channel that I was monitoring before. And I can go over some of them. Can a GLP be in different stages for different phrases? So a GLP can be in different stages, can use different stages depending on where they are. So they can use, like if they're in stage 3, they can use stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. You won't necessarily, and it may be for different phrases in the sense that they're able to break specific words out of maybe like a more used phrase than other ones at specific times, but it won't be, you won't see it necessarily for different phrases, if that makes sense. Kate, Laura, do you have a better way to explain that?
I don't think so, Laura. I don't know about you. I was also just reading some of the other questions. One of the ones that popped out to me was, do you have any resources on teaching language concepts to Gestalt language processors? What stage do you target these concepts? I specifically often have a hard time with prepositions and quantity concepts. And I think that that is an important observation, because what that's saying is that probably those prepositions and quantity concepts are within a Gestalt, and they aren't processing them as their own unit. And the truth be told, they need to move through the stages of NLA before you're going to do any of that kind of teaching, and certainly any kind of direct teaching around it. It would be fine to include them in Gestalts, but you'd end up not. You'd end up teaching individual Gestalts and not what you're trying to achieve with any kind of direct work on that, until a learner's, I would say, stage 4 and above.
Yeah, Alex mentions that as well in her course, just that these receptive language concepts, whether it be following directives or concepts where you're trying to understand any kind of academic or basic content, would be.
Pronoun reversal is another one that you hear people talk about a lot. There's one question about, for modeling changing perspectives from their MLU +1 strategy. What about when we see utterances from multiple phrases? Do you model at the highest stage or the most common? Does anybody want to? I think that we have to reconsider in general the +1, +2 as a strategy when we're working with Gestalt language processors. I think when we're thinking about what about utterances we see, I'm not sure I'm understanding the question exactly, but I think it's also about, it's not necessarily trying to get them to the next stage, but increasing the robustness with which they're able to communicate at their current stage, and increasing the number of strips they have, the number that they can use, or chunks that they can recombined, rather than thinking about it from a length of utterance, certainly, but do you model at the highest stage? I think it's more, I don't know, Laura or Kate, if you have another response to that.
I do. I think Marge would argue that a Gestalt language processor needs a lot of Gestalts to be able to move to a next stage. So being able to be where they are and provide additional models wherever they are is probably going to be a better use of time versus trying to show them where they should be next.
Okay, and Holly just added a little bit of clarification. So you mentioned modeling at the stage they're using, not the stage +1 techniques. If they're at multiple stages, what's the best model? I think you need to look at what their average is. So if you're taking really robust language samples and over time, and I know that's something that Alex and Marge talk about, but having a sense of on average where they're at and focusing there.
I'll also say it's not like one strategy is going to fit your entire session. So if I can give you guys any takeaway, I would just say, if you can do anything, acknowledge what you hear them saying, follow their lead, and just acknowledge the Gestalts, whether that be through YouTube media or on an AAC system or through mouth words. Whatever you're hearing, use that acknowledgement piece, take good language samples, and you're going to use different strategies. Like you might use some, add more Gestalts like Kate mentioned, and then also you might use some mitigations in stage 2. So hopefully that's helpful. We need to jump into the next session, but there was a couple questions I can answer quickly. So someone had asked how we picked Sophia the first. She actually was one who would stop the YouTube videos exactly where she wanted to process the Gestalt. So those were ones that the SLPN identified as ones that she would want in her system. Someone also asked if we put on the case study number 2 on Touch Chat, where we put those Gestalts, we put them on, we created a page called My Phrases under the groups page. So we did not put them under social, not to say you couldn't put them there, but we put them under groups in My Phrases. I also just want to say too, if hopefully some people are saying they did hear the audio and this is recorded, so hopefully the ones who could not hear the audio could come back to it on YouTube later.
Okay. Great. So this next portion, or this final portion of our presentation, is where are we going, thinking about what strategies we want to be using, recommendations specifically for AAC, and then our next steps and call to action. So first, let's see, sorry. Thanks. First and foremost, I think when we're supporting AAC for Gestalt language processors, we need to be leading with implementation strategies rather than looking for the right anything. So the right technology, the right targets, the right activities. We really want to be framing our work with these learners through broader strategies. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. First and foremost, it's really important that we're providing experiences with an understanding of language development through the NLA framework. So we're not talking, and I think Kate and Laura have made this pretty clear, but we're not talking about strips or carrier phrases. We're really talking about language development. And what we're looking to do is create or provide experiences where there's space and support for our learners who are Gestalt processors and AAC users to move through those stages of NLA. So when we think about strategies, number one, we need to be focusing on connection. We know that interaction and connection underlies everything, all communication. We interact with other people, we communicate because we want to understand and we want to be understood. And what that means is we need to be creating an environment for learners where they feel accepted for who they are now, regardless of how they're communicating or moving through the world, and that they have environments and people who feel safe to them. And one of the pieces of that is really respecting and responding to multimodal communication. So however a learner is communicating in a moment, be that the modality that they use or the language that they use, we need to be really validating that for them and responding. So we don't want to be too focused on the AAC or too focused on exactly what we're expecting from them. We want to really be responsive to what they're showing us. And we also we need to be thinking about co-regulation. So we need to be supporting our learners' regulation, be that sensory, emotional, or energy regulation, and make sure that they are feeling safe and supported with us. We also, for learning to happen, it needs to make sense to the learner from their perspective. So we really want to be thinking about what are their interests and passions, what language and language sources are meaningful to them, and be focusing there. And again, as I said, we want to be thinking about multimodal communication, because really getting to know our learners provides the best foundation for learning. And so we want to really be helping them have successful, enjoyable interactions, regardless of how they're communicating or regardless of what stage of language development they're at. And so we really want to be following our learners' lead. I think this is a primary strategy for all AAC learners, but it's really critical for our Gestalt language processors. We really want to take the time to get to know them, to observe, again, what are their interests, what are they attending to in any interaction, get to know what their perspective might be, or get curious about what their perspective might be, or the feelings that they're having. Really try to understand their experience in an environment or as a communicator. And we really, as we get curious, and Kate and Laura have touched on this idea of detective work, we want to be taking in what they're saying and being really open to a variety of interpretations of the way they're using language or how they might be feeling, and not take anything too literally, so that we can really focus on what makes sense to them and follow them, rather than sometimes if we get too literal, we take an interaction in a direction that is not what a learner intended, or is not going to, it's likely going to lead to disconnection. So as Laura said, just following whatever they're doing in the moment and validating it, whether or not we understand it. So following their lead means letting them pick activities, letting them drive what language in the moment is meaningful to them, allow them to drive the pace and the overall feeling of the interaction. It's important that we know that there's no right to play. There's no right way to play. Play has to be inherently joyful for the learner. So allowing them to play in any way that makes sense to them or is interesting and enjoyable for them. And when we do this, what we're really doing is we're centering self-determination. So which, going back to that conversation about motor planning and core vocabulary, by following their lead, we're really making sure that the work that we're doing is is with this foundation of understanding of self-determination. And it's going to increase the likelihood that those interactions we have with them and the language that we model will be meaningful to the learner. And it's also, as a result, more likely that they're going to take that language on and be able to use it and mitigate it and move on in their language development. And as we've touched on here, we really want to be working on their time, not next steps in NLA. So thinking about getting that general understanding of the average stage they're working at, and as we discussed in the questions, really increasing maybe the number of gestalts they have, or how the ways they can recombine them, rather than trying to always get to next steps. We have to follow their lead there as well. The next strategy that is really helpful for Gestalt language processors is declarative language. Speech pathologists who are listening will definitely be familiar with this. But really what we're trying to do is create a low pressure, mutually enjoyable interaction. And with declarative language, what we're trying to do is use more declaratives than imperative statements. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. Imperative language, imperatives are sentences that require a response. So asking questions, and this is again, what the communication partner might be doing. So asking questions, directing or instructing the learner, prompting them, asking for things. These all require a response from the learner, and they really put the learner on the spot. And it can be overwhelming. It can disrupt their focus or other processes that they need to be successful in that interaction. So that might be motor planning or cognitive linguistic processes. But we're by requiring a response for them, we're really putting them putting the focus on them and asking them to do something in a moment they may not be ready to. So example for that is, do you want chips? Put on your shoes, pick up the pencil, tell me with your talker, that kind of thing. All of those fall under imperative language and requiring a response from the learner. So in contrast, when we think about declarative statements, these are statements that don't require a response. They are commenting, describing, or making declarations about what's happening, sharing ideas, sharing feelings or thoughts. All of these can be said without requiring, in a way that does not require a response from the learner. So that's fun, I did it, or got to get the ball, right? It's okay to describe what's happening, and that got to get it is a great Gestalt to be modeling. So there's ways to talk about it without it being a required response, or it's a tall tower. And I think the other thing that I often find helpful is it's okay to wonder aloud. So if you're wondering or you have a question in mind, rather than posing it as a question and requiring a response, it's okay to say, I wonder if, and or I wonder what will happen, that kind of thing. But creating a rapport with your learner where they know that it's not required that they respond in that moment. And so when we use declarative language, really what we're doing is we're decreasing the pressure on our learner. We're inviting them to interact and participate, but not requiring that they do so. And declarative language can really support initiation and connection. We provide lots of great language models. We create a context where there's equal relationship. It's not one person's in charge and the other is following. It's really like we're in this together and we're enjoying it. And it really emphasizes that shared experience and shared enjoyment. And the beauty of declarative language and taking the pressure off of a learner is you're likely to get them to know them better as they initiate language more, as they feel more comfortable and interact more. You're going to get more of that, more information about them, both their language and what's important to them, so that you'll be able to connect with them further. I'm moving a little quickly because we are running low on time, and I don't know, do we have a couple extra minutes? Just trying to decide how quickly we should go through these remaining slides.
You can finish up the time. Yeah, I can do a quick review, and then we can have any questions at the end. Just be on the Padlet.
All right. So then another strategy that I think is really helpful is repetition with variety. So when we're modeling language, we want to do it with an eye to repeated exposures with moderate differences. And those differences can be in the context in which the language is used, the purpose with which the language is used, or sometimes the format in which that language is used. But really what we're doing is providing multiple presentations and opportunities to take on that language. It has to start with your detective work, right? Either, if you're working on helping a learner move to mitigate a Gestalt, we really want to do that with an understanding of their experience and what that language or interaction means to them. But we can use repetition with variety around use of those gestalts and mitigations, but also around pragmatic functions and contexts. A couple examples here of repetition with variety as it might apply to Gestalt language processors. So in terms of the language, we can take mitigable phrases like let's go, let's play, let's do it, let's get it. All of those, using those frequently will allow the learner to hear how those phrases compare, and it will support their mitigation of those chunks. So you know, let's is separate from go, and let's is separate from play, and or let's do it and let's get it. Then I can hear that there's variation there that will support their learning. It might mean that we are varying the communicative function with which we're using a particular Gestalt. We might be using a particular Gestalt in multiple contexts, so the learner hears it a lot, and we might be using it with a variety of different partners. And I think this is really helpful when we're thinking about particularly goals. If we're thinking about goal writing as moving them through the stages, I think it's far more supportive to think about how many contexts are they using it in, how many partners are they using it with, or you know, and what kind of functions are they communicating, rather than thinking only about moving them to the next step. How do we help them really fill out their language use so that they're using it really broadly? I'm going to talk briefly here about AAC system features that we feel are important for Gestalt language processors. This has been touched on a bit throughout the presentation, but we absolutely have to start with a robust language system. All language learners are moving towards generative utterances with single word units. So we need to be making sure that whatever language system we're selecting for our learner, they have access to the, you know, a well-designed, robust language system that has single word units. Recorded audio is very, very helpful, and access to video too, because it allows our learners to hear language in connected speech, and with the intonation that they really need to connect with that language and take it on as their own. It may be helpful to be able to embed videos when that's possible, but it's not really widely available within AAC systems at this time. And the other feature that you might look for in AAC systems is the option for real photographs as appropriate. I don't think that we would say that it has to be real photographs for Gestalt language processor at all. I think what's more important is that they're hearing the chunks of language and they're hearing it connected speech and with strong intonation. But for some particular learners, if a photograph carries a lot of meaning to them, then certainly it may help them to put that picture in. Beyond these features, it's or rather to know what AAC system might be right based on this, it's really important that you're connecting with your vendors or your local reps to get information about the specific systems that are commercially available. Okay, just some general programming advice here. When we're thinking about it, again, we need to start with a robust AAC system. We want to maintain the integrity of the language organization system. So we know that our learners are moving towards generative language with those single word units. So we don't want to mess with that language system too much, right? We really can interrupt the thought that was put into designing those language systems and why things were put in certain locations. So we want to add with an eye to that language organization. We want to be identifying a location within that language organization where it makes sense to put gestalts and mitigations, and that's going to vary based on the language system, as has been said previously. You have to really start with a strong knowledge of the language system that you're working with and where it might make sense for it to be. And then we can also be in, we talked a bit about the gestalts that the learner brings and how important those are. And we can also be introducing gestalts and that can be mitigated and applied across contexts. Especially if we're using them in a really connected, engaging, meaningful to the learner way. So we want to be programming those gestalts in that we might be modeling. Whenever possible, what we're recommending is that we're putting gestalts on pages that contain individual words that make up the gestalt. So that might be a topic specific page. Again, this is going to vary a lot depending on the language system that you're working with. So some language systems, this is not the design of the system, and we're aware of that. But when it is possible, it can help with transferring from the full gestalt or the mitigations to the full use of the vocabulary system as learners are moving onwards in stage 3, 4 and beyond. So that, again, thinking about helping them acquire those motor plans for the individual words when they're ready, that they're in close proximity. It can be helpful to develop a routine that allows the learner to indicate that they want a gestalt added to their AAC. Kate mentioned this in her case study, that the learner might, and it may be a social routine that's developed between the learner and their partners in terms of play, as Kate kind of described, playing a gestalt or from a media source, and then pointing to in that case, probably code to go, right? But pointing to the device or however that learner is communicating to their partners. It also may include adding something like, let's add that to my talker, or a message on the system that would allow them, or that could be modeled for them in those instances, to indicate to somebody that they wanted something added to their device. We don't want to be deleting gestalts off of language system or off of a learner's AAC if as they progress through. If we're listening to autistic adults and that there are times maybe under stress or dysregulation where communicating with the full gestalt will be easier and better for them. So we don't want to be moving away from them. We're really wanting to just fill their toolbox with options so they can choose what works for them in that moment. And then the other thing I'd like to say is we want to be using guided access with caution for these learners. So as we saw in some of the videos, and that they may be using media in unexpected ways, or certainly communicative ways, and so if we are locking them into their system, we may be reducing their options for communication, and that can be a shift for a lot of people because there may be concerns around YouTube or camera roll or other language sources being disruptive. But I think really, again, connecting with the learner in front of you and seeing how they're using media or other sources of language will help you understand them more, rather than try and keep them from it. And so now some call to actions here, things we need to be thinking about as we move forward. So we need more awareness in general among SLPs, researchers, teachers, families, and professionals. And it was really nice to see with the responses to the poll suggesting that people are becoming more aware and are learning. I think for myself, as a parent of a Gestalt language processor, it really forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about language development. But integrating what I learned by following my daughter's language development has really helped bring that understanding to my clinical practice, and has really changed the outcomes for my clients. So I think an increased awareness and understanding of Gestalt language processing is really going to allow for us to support our learners better. Right. we we need to know more, and this clearly points to the need for more case studies and more research in this area. So we need to know more about Gestalt language processors in general, more about their course of development in terms of language, and more about the strategies that support them. And particularly in the realm of AAC, we really need to know more about Gestalt language processors in stage 1 who are primarily non-speaking, because as came up in the questions and in general, they can be harder to identify, and hard to know how to best support them and figure out what language sources are connecting with them. So that's definitely an area we need to know more. So while there's definite value in broadening the evidence base, I think we need to be really thoughtful about what we already know. And for me as a clinician, while I do want more research, I am currently more concerned with the lack of progress or access to communication that some of my clients might have if I don't shift my practice. So rather than for me personally, my focus is more on how can I support my learners to make progress, and while also, again, supporting the desire for more research. But just because we might perceive that the evidence base is not where we want it to be yet, that doesn't mean we're not still charged to support these learners and figure it out and help them have the best outcomes they can have. And so as professionals, I think it's really important for us to think about what is our role on this AAC journey for Gestalt language processors. I think we should be questioning whether or not we're truly experts in this realm. I think we're not. Instead, I think what we really need to do is be thinking about ourselves as supporting these learners, moving through this process with a lot of humility, because we don't know as much as we might think we do, and getting super, super curious, trying to understand our learner, doing that detective work to understand them, and then engaging in dynamic assessment, trying things, seeing what's working, what's not working. That's really what's going to help you support an individual learner. And as we go through the process of case studies, it will help give the field some information about, what needs to be researched further, or what might be helpful. And so just in general, being open and trying things is what's going to help us support these learners best. Okay, I think it's also that really, really critical that we're listening to those with lived experience here. There are Gestalt language processors, autistic adults, AAC users who are talking about their experiences, and we need to be listening to them. So a lot of them are sharing their experiences online, and they're very accessible to us as professionals. So really listening to them and trying to understand their experience and taking that and helping use it to inform our practice is really, really critical. They're the ones who have lived it. And then here, finally, I think this applies to all AAC learners, but I think it's particularly critical for our Gestalt language processors when we encounter challenges or barriers on this AAC journey, or if we encounter a lack of progress. It's really important to know that the learner is never the problem, right? The AAC system might be, we may need to tweak it. We may need to make some adjustments, but it's more than likely that the implementation is the issue. And for our Gestalt language processors, often that may be because we don't have a good understanding of their language processing style. And so we're not supporting them in a way that works for them. So in all things, stop and take a look at how things are being implemented before we draw any conclusions about the AAC system, but certainly so we don't draw conclusions about the learner's ability or potential for growth.
Okay, so we have like 2 seconds left, but here is a list of some resources, both free and paid. There's podcasts available and YouTube videos. There's ASHA articles and Facebook groups for free. There's some courses through Meaningful Speech, as well as Marge Blanc's Natural Language Acquisition courses 1, 2, and 3 that provides ASHA CEUs. So there's lots and lots of resources out there to gather more information. Surveys show that SLPs still want and need more information on Gestalt language processing strategies and its role with AAC. We're definitely going to continue working to provide additional resources and learn from those who are Gestalt language processors, and as Kate was talking about, lived experiences. And we really just need to learn more at this point.
I realize we don't have our contact information in there, ladies. So I will, if you have questions, we'll do our best to respond to the Slack channel and the Padlet. So if you have a question on there that's still looming, we will try our best to answer those after the presentation. As we mentioned, we can talk about this all day. We are SLPs and we love this topic. So we don't want the conversation to stop here. I will put our contact information there, and please reach out if you guys have questions.
Absolutely.
And thanks for hanging in there for 2 hours with us.
Great. We want to thank everyone for attending this session of AAC in the Cloud, and hope you enjoy the